तो हेलो दोस्तों, स्वागत है आप सबका एक बार और एस टू एड में। देखिए, इंडियन इकॉनमी इस वाली सीरीज़ में कर रहे थे और इसमें फर्स्ट चैप्टर और सेकंड चैप्टर कंप्लीट कर चुके हैं। ठीक है, इस वाली सीरीज़ में क्या है, हम साइड बाय साइड जो है इकॉनमी की बुक पढ़ते हैं। ठीक है, तो अभी देखिए फर्स्ट चैप्टर और सेकेंड चैप्टर पढ़ चुके थे। देखिए अब थर्ड चैप्टर की बारी है। इसमें हमको एवोल्यूशन ऑफ इंडियन इकॉनमी पढ़ना है कि इंडियन इकॉनमी का एवोल्यूशन कैसे हुआ है। ठीक है, इस चैप्टर में देखिए हमको क्या क्या देखने को मिलेगा। बैकग्राउंड देखने को मिल जाएगा, प्राइम मूविंग फोर्स देखने को मिल जाएगी, एग्रीकल्चर वर्सेस इंडस्ट्री, प्लान्ड एंड मिक्स्ड इकॉनमी देखने को मिल जाएगी और इम्फेसिस ऑन पब्लिक सेक्टर देखने को मिल जाएगा। चलिए तो स्टार्ट करते हैं। तो सबसे पहले आइए बैकग्राउंड देखते हैं। देखिए क्या कह रहा है बैकग्राउंड में क्या कह रहा है। देखिए, द इकोनॉमिक प्रोफाइल ऑफ इंडिया वॉज इन complete distress at the time of independence. Being a typical case of colonial economy, India was serving a purpose of development not for itself but for a foreign land, the United Kingdom. The both agriculture and industry were having structural distortions while the state was playing not even a marginal role. During the half century before India became independent, the world was having accelerated development and expansion in its agriculture industry on the shoulders of the active role being played by the states. With the same was happening in the United Kingdom itself. There was not only the unilateral transfer of the investable capital to Britain by the colonial states, the drain of wealth, but the unequal change was day by day crippling India's commerce, trade, and thriving handloom industry too. The colonial state practiced policies which were great impediments in the process of development in the country. Throughout the colonial rule, the economic vision that the state had was to increase India's capacity to export primary products, the increase the purchase import of the British manufactured goods and raise revenue to meet the drain of capital as well as meet the revenue requirements of the imperial defense. The social actor was neglected area for the British ruler, which had a negative impact on the production and productivity of the economy. India remained a continent of illiterate peasants under British rule. At the time of independence, India's literacy was only 17%, with the 32.5 years of life expectancy at birth. Industrialization of India was also neglected by the colonizers. The infrastructure was not built to industrialize India but to exploit its raw material. Indian capitalists who did emerge were highly dependent on the British commercial capital, and many sectors of the industry were dominated by the British firms, for example, shipping, banking, insurance, coal plantation, crop, and jute. The pre independence period was together a period of near stagnation, showing almost no change in the structure of proportion or in the level of productivity. The aggregate real output during the first half of the 20th century estimated at less than 2% a year or loss. The overall economic performance of India under the British rule was very low. According to the economic statistician Angus Madison, there was no per capita growth in India from 1600 to 1870. Per capita growth was made 0.2% from 1870 to 1947 compared to 1% in the United Kingdom. The per capita income of 18 rupees for 1899 and 39.5 rupees for 1895 in current prices convey the true story of the abject poverty Indian masses were faced with. The repeated famines and diseases epidemics during the second half of the 19th century and first half of the 20th century show the greatest socio-economic irresponsibility and neglect of the British government in India on one hand, and the wretchedness of the masses on the other. Both the political leader and industrialists were very much aware and conscious about the economic inheritance. Once India became independent, somehow these dominant lot of people who were going to lay down the foundation stone of the independent Indian economy almost has a consensual view even before independence on many major strategic issues. First, state or government should be given a direct responsibility for government, the ambitious and vital role to be assigned to the public sector. Third, necessity for development of heavy industries. Fourth, discouragement of the foreign investment. And fifth, the need for economic planning. Once India became independent, it was a real challenge for the government of the time to go for the systematic organization of the economy. This was a task filled with challenges and hurdles, as the economy had hardly anything optimistic. The need for delivering growth and development was in huge demand in the face of political leadership, as the country was riding on the promises and vibes of the nationalist fervor. It was not a simple task. Now the decision which were to be taken by the political leadership of the time were going to shape the very future of India. Many important and strategic decisions were taken only by 1956, which has shaped the Indian economy journey till the date. Undoubtedly, they heavily dominated the pre-reform period, but the post-reform period is also not completely free from its impact. To understand the nature and scope of the Indian economy in current time, it is not only useful but also essential to go through the fact, regions, and delicacies which made the economy evolve and unfold the way it did. The brief overview of the overview as follows. तो देखिए अब brief overview देख रहे हैं. Prime moving force agriculture versus industry. The topical issue of the debate regarding the India has been a choice of the sector which will lead the process of development. The government of the time opted for the industry to be India's prime moving force, PMF, of the economy. Whether India should have gone for the agriculture as its prime moving force for better prospect of development is a highly debatable issue even today among experts. Every economy has to aim for the development through the exploitation of its natural and human resources. There are priorities of objectives set by the economy which should be realized in a proper time frame. The availability and non-availability of the resources, natural as well as human, are not the only issue which make the economy decide whether to opt for the agriculture or industry as its prime moving force. There are other socio-political compulsions and objectives which play a major role in such decision making. The political leadership selected industry as the leading force of the economy. After independence, it was already decided by the dominant group of nationalist leaders way back in the mid 1930s, when they felt the need of the economic planning in India before setting up the National Planning Committee in 1938. Given the available resource base, it seems an illogical decision as India lacked all those prerequisites which could suggest declaration of industry as its prime moving force. First, almost no presence of infrastructure sector, that is power, transportation and communication. Second, negligible presence of the infrastructure industries, that is iron and steel, cement, coal, crude oil refining and electricity. Third, lack of investable capital either by the government or the private sector. Fourth, absence of required technology to support the process of industrialization and no research and development. Fifth, lack of skilled manpower. Sixth, absence of entrepreneurship among the people. Seventh, absence of market for industrial goods. Eighth, many other socio-physiological, psychological factors which acted as a negative force for the proper industrialization of the economy. The obvious choice for India would have been agriculture sector as prime moving force of the economy because of the following two reasons. First, the country had the natural resource of the fertile land which was fit for cultivation. Second, human capital did not require any kind of higher training. By only organizing its land ownership, irrigation, and other inputs to agriculture, India could have gone for a better prospect of development. Once there were no crisis of food, shelter, and basic health care to the masses, one goal of development could have been realized, a general welfare of the people. Once the masses were able to achieve the level of the purchasing capacity, India could have gone for the expansion of industries. India was capable of generating as much surplus income of its masses as was required by the emerging industries. For market success, the People's Republic of China did the same in 1949. Taking a realistic evolution of its sources, it declared agriculture as its prime moving force for the economy. The surplus generated out of the agriculture was suitably invested to develop prerequisites for the industrialization, and the country went for it in the 1970s. The emergence of the industrial China was so vibrant that its impact was felt in the so-called highly developed and industrialized economy of the world. The industrial homework of the China catapulted it into a giant. Was the political leadership of the independent India not able to analyze the realities as we did above and conclude the agriculture should have been the moving force of the economy in the place of industry? It is possible that the Pandit Nehru in command could have missed the rational analysis of the Indian realities. The giant among the Asian visionaries of the time, Mao was still to emerge on the international scene. How could India have not opted for agriculture as its primary force, whose leadership had fought the nationalist movement on the Gandhian forwards of village agriculture and rural development? Even if Gandhi was not in the government, there were many devout Gandhians in it, and no one should doubt that the main internal force which vibrated throughout the governmental decisions were nothing but the Gandhian socialism. There were many decisions which were taken under the influence of the of the main political force of the time, and still some very vital one were influenced by the visionary hunches of the political leadership, mainly being Jawaharlal Nehru. This is why the economic thinking of the independent India is considered and said to be nurtured by Nehruvian economics even today. If we go through a major literatures on the Indian economic history, views of the critics of the time and contemporary experts, we may be we may be able to realize the answer as to why India went for industry as its primary force in place of obvious and logical choice of agriculture, which should not be content with the knowing that even today is the highly debatable issue among experts. Looking at the resources available, agriculture would have been the obvious choice as prime moving force of the economy, that is cultivable land and human power. But as agriculture was using traditional tools and technology, its modernization as well as future mechanization later to some extent would have been blocked due to the lack of indigenous industrial support. If India would have gone for import, this would have required enough foreign reserves and the natural dependence on the foreign countries. By choosing industry as primary force, India opted to industrialize the economy as well as modernize the traditional mode of farming. Second, the dominant ideology around the world, as well as in the World Bank, WB, and the International Monetary Fund (IMF), was in favor of industrialization as a means to faster growth, be translated which could be translated to faster development. These international bodies were supporting the member countries from every point of view to industrialize. The same was the case with the developed economies. It was possible not only to industrialize faster on these scales, these supports of the organizations, but also hope for emerging as an industrial exporter in the future. The same kind of the support was not offered to an economy that opted for the agriculture as its primary force. Basically, going for the agriculture sector was considered as a symbol of backwardness at the time. The political leadership wanted to carry India ahead and not in the backward direction. It was only in 1990s that the world and the World Bank or IMF changed its opinion regarding the agriculture sector. After 1990s, emphasis on this sector by an economy was no more considered a sign of backwardness. Third, the Second World War has proved that the supremacy of the defense power. For defense, a country needs the support of not only science and technology but also an industrial base. India also required a powerful defense base for itself as a deterrent force. By opting for the industries as the prime moving force of the economy, India tried to solve many challenges simultaneously. First, industry will drive faster growth. Second, agriculture will be modernized in no time. And third, the economy will be able to develop its own defense against external threats. Since the economy had also opted for the scientific and technological preparedness, its achievements were to sustain the pace of the modernization. Fourth, even before independence, there was a socio-economic consensus among the social scientists along with the national leaders that the India needed a boost towards the social change as the country lagged behind in the area of modernization. A break from the traditional and outmoved way of the life and cultivation of scientific outlook was a must for the country. Such feeling also made the political leadership of the time to go in favor of the wholehearted industrialization. Fifth, by the time India achieved her independence, the might of industrialization was already proven and there were no doubt regarding its efficacy. Given above are some of the important reasons that work to make Indian political leadership go in favor of the industry as the economy's primary force. Probably the resource related to the temperamental realities of the India were marginalized in the hope and wish of the future industrialized and developed India. It is yet impossible to conclude whether the economy has completely failed to do so or not. Experts have divided opinion on this issue. The last decade of the 20th century, that is decade of 1990s, saw major changes taking place in the world economic idea about the agriculture sector. It was no more a symbol of the backwardness for an economy that emphasized on the agriculture sector as the engine of growth and development. China had proved to the world how agriculture could be made prime moving force of an economy and generate internal as well as external strength to emerge as an industrial economy. In the wake of ongoing reform processes, India was introspecting almost all economic policy it followed since independence. It was time for the agriculture sector to have the prime attention. A major shift took place in the Indian economic thinking when the government announced in 2002 that from then onwards, in place of industry, agriculture will be prime moving force of the economy. This was a policy shift of the historic importance which was announced by the highest economic think tank of the country, the Planning Commission, as the economy commenced the 10th plan 2002 to 7. As per Planning Commission, such a policy shift will solve three major challenges faced by the economy. First, economy will be able to achieve food security with an increase in the agriculture production. Besides, the agricultural surplus will generate export in the globalization world economy benefit out of the World Trade Organization regime. Second, the challenges of the poverty alleviation will be solved to a great extent as the emphasis will make the agriculture a higher income generating occupation and induce growth in the rural economy by generating more gainful employment. Third, the situation of the India as an example of the market failure will cease. Though the world's perception regarding the agriculture has changed by the mid 1990s, India recognized the sector as a prime moving force of the economy a bit late, that is by 2002. Now there is a consensus among the experts and policymakers regarding the role of the agriculture in the Indian economy. Agriculture and allied activities remained the major source of livelihood for nearly half of the Indian population. Its share in the employment being 48.7% with 16.5% contribution in GDP. Once the India started the process of economic reforms, it began thriving in industrial sectors sector as the economy received its structure through the successive industrial policy. It seems a common undertaking. To the extent the agriculture sector is concerned, reforms were initiated a bit late by early 2000. Three major reasons may be cited for this delay. First, agriculture being always open for the private sector, it was now difficult to go for the privatization of the encouraging investment. The need was for corporate and contract farming under leadership. Second, lack leadership of corporate world. Second, lack of awareness about the contours of the economic reforms among the farm community. Third, heavy dependency of the population on the agriculture for livelihood could not permit the government to opt for the right kind of the agriculture reforms as at the right time. First, the industrial sector via manufacturing need expansion to lessen the population dependency of the agriculture on the agriculture sector. Any one sector in which the government at the center and the state have been facing the biggest hurdle has been farm sector. The major reforms needs and the hurdles being faced by the sum may be summed up as follows. First, the national agri market is the need of the hour, but there is a lack of the political will among the majority of the state to put in place the right kind of agriculture produce market committee. Second, the need for promoting corporate investment in the farm sector is hurdled by the lack of effective and transparent land acquisition law. Third, labor reforms need fine tuning to promote industrial farming, which is impeded due to the long tradition of the complex labor laws of the countries. Fourth, farm mechanization is hindered by the lack of investment in the industry. Fifth, research and development needs huge investment from the private sector, but there is a lack of a conducive atmosphere for it. Sixth, right kind of the downstream and upstream requirement together with the proper kind of supply chain management is absent in the area of agri goods. Seventh, expansion of the right kind of the commodity trading in agri commodities. Seventh, strengthening the farm sector to face the competition posed by the agriculture sector of the developed world with regard to the subsidies and prices. In the wake of the globalizing world economy, making farming numerative to check farm crisis of the contemporary times. Experts believe that for taking a right policy step in the sector, the high degree of the federal maturity in the country is needed. Increased awareness among the farmers, together with the right government support to prevent farm distress, will serve the purpose in a great way. Planned and mixed economy. Independent India was declared to be planned and a mixed economy. India needed national planning, which was decided by the political leadership almost a decade before independence. India was not only facing regional disparities at the level of resources, but inter-regional disparities were also prevalent for centuries. Mass poverty could only be remedied once the government started the process of economic planning. Economic planning was thus considered as established tool of doing away with such disparities. Basically, it was abject poverty of the masses, which made the government opt for the planning so that it could play a active role in the allocation of the resources and mobilize them for equitable growth and development. Though India was constitutionally declared a federation of the state, in the process of planning, the authority of regulation, directing and undertaking economic activities became more and more centralized in the union government. India's decision for the planned economy was also molded by some contemporary experiences in the world. Firstly, the Great Depression of 1929 and the reconstruction challenges after the Second World War had made experts to conclude in favor of the state intervention in the economy. Opposite to the contemporary India of not interference as proposed by the Adam Smith. Secondly, it was the same time that command economies, that is state economies of the Soviet Union and the East European countries started making news about their faster economic growth. In 1950s and 1960s, the dominant view among the policymakers around the world was in favor of the active role of the state in the economy. Thirdly, a dominant role of the state in the economy to neutralize market failure situation, as happened during the period of the Great Depression when the demand fell to the lowest level, was gaining ground around the world. For many newly independent developing nations, economic planning was therefore an obvious choice. Economic planning was considered to help states to mobilize resources to realize and prioritize objectives in a well defined time frame. Once the political leadership had decided in the favor of the planned economy for India, and a major role of the state in the economy, they need to clarify the organizational nature of the economy, whether it was to be state economy or mixed economy, because planning was not possible in the free market economy, that is capitalistic economy. The idea of the planning in India was inspired from the Soviet planning, which was a command economy and did not suit the requirements of the democratic India, which was till now a privately owned economy. The dominant force behind the planning in India, at least after independence, was the Nehru himself, who had strong socialist leanings. He thought it was an important to define the role of the state in the economy, which was going to be at times similar in the state in the Soviet Union and at times completely dissimilar to it. Though there was an example of the capitalistic democratic system going for planning, France by that time 1947 it has little experience to offer the Indian policymakers. France had gone for a mixed economy by 1944 to 45, which was with the basic urge to accelerate the process of economic growth. The planners went on to define the respective roles of the state and market. In the very first plan, the following lines look refreshingly ahead of the time and are crystal clear about the scope of the government's role in the economy vis-a-vis the private sector. This brings us to the problem of the techniques of planning. The possible approach to the problem is, as mentioned earlier, through a more or a less complete nationalization of the means of production and extensive system of government control on the allocation of resources and on the distribution of the national product. Just purely as a technique of planning, this may appear a promising line of action, but viewed against the background of the objectives outlined above and in the light of practical considerations, such an expansion of the public sector is at the present stage neither necessary nor desirable. Planning in a democratic setup implies the minimum use of the compulsion or correction for bringing about a realignment of the productive forces. The resource available to the public sector have at this stage to be utilized for the investment along new lines rather than in acquisition of the existing productive capacity. Public
ownership of the means of the production may be necessary in certain cases. Public regulation and control in the certain others. The private sector has, however, to continue to play an important part in the production as well as in distribution. Planning under recent consideration thus means, in practice, an economy guided and directed by the state and operated partly through direct state action and partly through private initiative and efforts. The above quoted lines are imaginatively ahead of the times, which will be suitable to note here that as the 1950s and 1960s made world expert favor state intervention in the economy, the East Asian miracle of the coming 3 decades was going to define the very limit of such an intervention. The East Asian economies were able to sustain a high growth rate over 3 decades and had received again the discussions regarding the perspective roles of the state and the market as well as nature of the state's role in the economy. The kinds of conclusion drawn were very similar to view presented in India's first plan itself, which was presented by World Bank in 1993. The real nature of the Indian brand of the mixed economy, though beautifully outlined in 1951 itself, went through a process of detailed evolution in 1950. By the end of the 1950, the concept of mixed economy was almost buried and rose from the hibernation only by the mid 1980s and finally early in 1990s. In the wake of process of the economic reforms, we see the government modifying the process of planning and functions of planning commission. In the wake of the reform process, an attempt to redefine the roles of government and private sector in economy. In a sense, India was increasingly getting more dependent on the latter for the promotion of the growth and development. By the early 2015, we saw a major change taking place in the area of planning in India. The government replaced the existing body, the Planning Commission, with the Niti Aayog, a new economic think tank, with the aim of overhauling the very process and method of the planning in the country. This move is believed to originate out of the India's experiences of the development planning spanning over 6 decades. Cooperative federalism, bottom up approach, holistic and inclusive development in the need of the Indian model of development are some of the hallmarks of the new design. The move is also seen in the light of the changed needs of the economy. Atmanirbhar push. Even though self-reliance had been one of the 6 major objectives of the planning, a renewed push for it has been announced by the government in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. In 1920 to 21, the government launched the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan. To support this cause, the government aims at attaining the self-reliance with the help of the 5 pillars of the Abhiyan, namely economy, infrastructure, system, vibrant demography and demand. This is for the first time that clear pillars have been defined by the government in this regard. Some cities have shown their reservation regarding the Abhiyan and have called it similar to the Make in India, a scheme of the past. However, some experts have seen it as the backdrop of the limits of the global supply chain caused by the recent pandemic and similar possibilities in the future. India has to redesign the economic space relationship with the environment and economic diplomacy. Emphasis on the public sector. The state was to be given an active and dominant role in the economy. It was very much decided by the time India became independent. There were no doubts about it in the mind of the people who formed the dominant political force at the time. Naturally, there was going to be a giant structure of the government controlled enterprises known as public sector undertakings, PSUs. Criticism aside, there was at that time a strong logic behind the glorification of PSUs. Some of the reasons for the heavy investment in the PSUs were purely natural, while others were consequential in nature. There were certain highly commendable objectives set for them. They were where some other goals would go on. To serve the very soul of the mixed economy, we must go for an impartial and rational analysis of the matter. In the midst of the criticism of PSUs and contemporary moves of the privatizing them, to understand their role in the Indian economy, we may understand the reason behind the ambitious expansion of the PSUs in the face of the following major requirements. First, infrastructural needs. Every economy, whether it is agrarian, industrial, or the post industrial, needs suitable level of the infrastructure such as power, transportation, and communication. Without their healthy presence and expansion, no economy can grow and develop. On the eve of independence, India has almost no presence of these three basic requirements. There was just a beginning in the area of railways and post and telegraphs. Power was restricted to the selective homes of the government and princely states. It means even if India had opted for the agriculture as its prime force, it had to develop the infrastructure sector. These sectors require too much capital investment as well as heavy engineering and technological support from their development. Expansion of the infrastructure sector was considered not possible by the private sector of the time as they could not possibly manage the following components. First, heavy investment in the domestic as well as foreign currency. Second, technology. Third, skilled manpower. And fourth, entrepreneurship. Even if these inputs were available to the private sector, it was not feasible for them as there was no market for such infrastructure. These infrastructure were essential for the economy, but they needed to be either subsidized or almost free supply as the masses lacked the market determined purchasing capacity. Under these typical conditions, it was only the government which could have shouldered the responsibility. The government could have managed not only the inputs required for the development of the sector but also supplication and distribution of them to advantaged areas and customers for proper growth of the economy. There were no alternative, which is why the infrastructure sector in India has such a dominant state presence that many areas have obvious government monopolies, as in power, railways, activation, telecommunication, and so forth. Second, industrial needs. India had opted for the industrial sector as its primary force, as we saw earlier. Now, there were some areas of industry which the government had to invest in due to several compulsive reasons. For industrialization to take place, the presence of the certain industries is essential. These industries have been called in the countries by different names: basic industries, infrastructure industries, core sector. To the initial group of six industries in the 2013 to new industry, natural gas and fertilizers were added. The combined weight of these eight industries in the new series of the index of the industrial production IIP is 40.27%. These industries are as follows. Their percentage weight in IIP index of industrial production are given in the brackets. First, refinery products 11.29, second, electricity 7.99, third, steel 7.22, fourth, coal 4.16, fifth, crude oil 3.62, sixth, natural gas 2.77, seventh, cement 2.16, eighth, fertilizers 1.09. Similar to the infrastructure sector, these basic industries also require high level of capital, technology, skilled manpower, and articulation in the entrepreneurship, which was again considered not feasible for the private sector of the time to manage. Even if the private sector supplied good from the basic industries, they might not be able to sell their products in the market due to lower purchasing power of the consumer. Perhaps that is why again the responsibility of developing the basic industry were taken up by the government. But out of the six basic industries, the cement industry had some strength in the private sector, while in the iron and steel industry alone private company was present. The coal industry was controlled by the private sector, and crude oil and refining was just a beginning by then. The level of the demands of the industrializing India was never to be met by existing strength of the basic industry. Neither the required level of expansion in them was possible by existing number of private players. With no choice left, the government decided to play main role in industrializing the country. In many of them, as a result, see a natural monopoly of the PSU again. Third, employment generation. The PSUs were also seen as the important part of the employment generation strategy. The government in a democratic setup cannot think only economics, but it has to realize the socio-political dimension of the nation too. The country was faced with the serious problem of poverty, and the workforce was increasing at a fast rate. Providing employment opportunities to underprivileged people is a time tested tool of the poverty alleviation. The PSUs were thought to create enough job for the enjoyable workforce of the economy. There was also felt an immediacy for a social change in the country. The poverty of the greater section of the country was somehow connected to the age-old caste system, which propitiated propitiated the stronghold of the upper caste on the ownership of the land, which was the only means of income and livelihood for almost over 80% of the population. Along with the ambitious policy of the land reform, the government decided to provide reservation to the weaker section of the society in the government jobs. The upcoming PSUs were supposed to put such jobs at the disposal of the government, which could have been distributed along the decided reservation policies. Such reservations were considered as the economic tool for social change. In the highly capital intensive sector in which the government companies were going to enter, managing investable funds to set them up was not going to be an easy task. The government did manage the fund with the source such as taxation, international and external borrowing, and even taking a last refuge in the printing of the fresh currencies. The government went on to justify the high taxation and high public indebtedness in supplying employment to the Indian employable population. The PSUs were considered by the government as the focus of the trickle down effect. The government did everything to set up and run the PSUs as the benefit were supposed to percolate to the masses, finally reinforcing growth and development in the country. Employment in the PSUs was seen as the effort to tackle down theory. Simply put, at a point of time, Nehru even referred to the PSUs as being the temple of modern India. The government went on to commit a job to every household via the PSU without calculating the dimension of the future labor force in the country and the required resources to create jobs at such a high scale. But the government went on creating new PSUs without analyzing the fiscal repercussions, moreover believing them to be the real engine of equitable growth. The employment generation responsibility of the PSU is extended to such an extent by the government that most of them had an oversupply of the labor force, which started draining its profit on the account of salary, wages, pension, and provident fund. The latter two had late financial impact. Fourth, profit and development of the social sector. The investment to be made by the government in the PSUs was in the nature of the asset creation, and these entities were to be involved in the production activities were natural for the government to gain control over the profit and dividends accruing among them. The goods and services the PSUs produced and sold provided disposable income to the government. The government has had a conscious policy of spending the income generated by the PSUs. They were to be used in the supply of social goods or what is called the public goods, and thus the India was to have a developed social sector. By the social goods, the government meant the universal supply of the certain goods and services to citizens. This include education, healthcare, nutrition, drinking water, social security in India. It means that the PSUs were also visioned as the revenue generator of the development of the social sector. Due to many regions of the PSUs would not be able to generate as much profit as was required for healthy development of the social sector. This eventually hampered the availability of the public goods in the country. In place of giving profit back to the government, a large number of the PSUs started incurring huge losses and required budgetary support regularly. Fifth, rise of the private sector. As the PSU took the responsibility of supplying infrastructure as the basic industries to the economy, a base for the rise of the private sector industries was slowly established. With the rise of private sector industries in the country, the process of the industrialization was thought to be completed. Out of many roles of the PSUs were proposed to play, this was the most far-sighted. What happened to the different role of the PSUs were assigned is a totally different matter, to which we will return while discussing industrial scenario of the country. Here we have analyzed why the government of the India after independence opted for such an ambitious plan of expensing the expansion of public sector. Besides, the PSUs were aimed at many other connected areas of developmental concerns such as self-sufficiency in production, balanced regional development, spread of small and ancillary industry, low and stable prices, and long-term equilibrium in the balance of payment. Over time, the PSUs have played a critical role in promoting the growth and development of the country. By the mid 1980s, there emerged a kind of consensus across the world, including the IMF and World Bank, regarding the efficiency and underperformance of the PSU. In the wake of idea of the Washington Consensus, which is said to promote neoliberal economic policies across the world, in the wake of it, there commenced a process of privatization and disinvestment of the PSU among the majority of economies in the world, India being no exception to it. By the late 1990s, new studies proved that underperformance and efficiency could be present in the private sector companies too. By the mid 2000s, in the wake of US subprime crisis, a new consensus emerged among the international organization that state or government need not exit the economy, and a kind of slowdown towards the privatization move of the PSU across the world. The world, in a sense of pushing the pause button on neoliberalism, is under process. India pursued a less ambitious disinvestment policy from 2003 to 2004 to 2015 to 2016. The government had decided to own controlling shares among the divested PSUs. Since the 2016-17 financial year, the government had decided to restart the process of strategic disinvestment, in which the ownership of the PSU may also be transferred to the private sector. Such a policy of disinvestment was launched by the government in 2000, which was paused by UPA 1 in 2003-4, the government has also decided in favor of selling increased shares of the PSUs to the foreign institution at par with the domestic financial institutions. Such policy moves of recent times should be seen in the light of the certain important contemporary realities, need of promoting investment in the economy, needs of the government to quit undesirable area of the economic activities and expanding in the areas of need and where private sector will not enter, welfare action and revenue generation by stake sale, monetization of their assets and enhance profit from the PSUs. By selling majority stakes in the PSUs on one hand, the government will de-burden itself from the owner responsibility, while on the other its share of the revenue from the divested PSU will increase as the new owner will run the enterprise on the market principle. तो इसी के साथ देखिए थर्ड चैप्टर की रीडिंग कंप्लीट हो गई है। ठीक है, ये सिर्फ रीडिंग है। ठीक है, पहले रीडिंग वाला हम पूरा पोर्शन कर लेते हैं इकॉनमी का, उसके बाद डिस्कशन वाला पोर्शन करेंगे। ठीक है, तो ये वाला कर लेते हैं। देखिए आप देखेंगे अगर जो तो आपको चैनल पे जो है जियोग्राफी का जो है 5 क्लासेस पढ़ी थी, 6वीं क्लासेस भी पढ़ गई है, उसको भी जाके विजिट कर लीजिए। ठीक है, उसको भी कंटिन्यू कर दिया। और साथ ही साथ में मिडीवल इंडिया की जो है अब डिस्कशन सीरीज स्टार्ट हो गई, जिसमें हम फिजिकली आके समझाते हैं। देखिए कहीं ना कहीं आप फिजिकली देखेंगे थोड़ा ज़्यादा समझ में आएगा। चलिए ठीक है, और वीडियो को लाइक ज़रूर कीजिए और चैनल को फॉलो करके सब्सक्राइब करके जल्द से जल्द जो है 50 सब्सक्राइबर्स तक पहुंचा दीजिए। चलिए अभी के लिए इतना ही रखते हैं, मिलते हैं अगले वीडियो में। तब तक के लिए चलिए अपना ध्यान रखिए और पढ़ाई लिखाई का भी ध्यान रखिए। चलिए ठीक है, मिलते हैं अगले वीडियो में। थैंक यू।